250, almost 3. Yep. We're in? We're in. Okay. Any questions from last week, and how did you like the telepresence?
It's interesting. You can't record them on TV.
Well, you could, but
I tried.
yeah. Yeah, I don't know. Sometimes there's a scrambling signal, but theoretically you can at least download the YouTube links. Yeah. And it depends on your home setup. Sometimes, I don't think we're putting out a scrambling signal, but, you know, it's weird. The way I got...
a lot of computers here won't open up here, except only the slides.
Only the slides?
So I can see the slides, but if I want to like open up the other thing, it won't let me.
Huh, okay.
And I tried to get a lady out there.
All right.
I just want the slides.
Okay. Well, we'll figure a way around that. There is a way through every block. I like to use visual aids, and I was trying to incorporate this particular visual aid, and I'll just refer to it when I come to it. So we're going to continue on from where we left off. I got 2 words for you today, for your vocabulary. First, justice chess. Now, among my people, one of the things that we do is there's 2 traditions. One is tradition and the other is innovation. And because tradition and innovation are both like traditions, if you will, basically tradition is something that worked and you repeat it, but sometimes you encounter a situation in life where your traditions don't work because it's a new situation. So you have to create something out of nothing. As a jazz musician, this is easy. That's what we do. We actually turn mistakes into art. And you got to be able to improvise. Basically, what rappers are doing today is what the griots of old used to do. You had to the griots were actually way more sophisticated than rappers because you actually had to make up a praise song on the spot, reciting the king's history, going back as far as they could, and a praise song could take 3 days. That's 3 days of continuously, not just rapping, but singing, playing your instrument, which is the griot's traditional instrument was the kora. So you're singing these praise songs in the king's court for like 3 days, because it might take that long to talk about the king's lineage. And sometimes you made it up on the spot, and you can go to Africa, and there are actually griots that they call themselves griots, but they will make up praise songs on the spot for the tourists, which is okay. Right. Whatever, however that works, right? So the game that you know as chess, okay, has ancient roots among people of color. That's where it came from. So I'm giving you a new concept. As far as I know, I created it, but I had to give people an idea of how do you deal with working against depression. I said, well, the way they're going to come at you is predictable. Okay? And the way that you can succeed, given the rules of the game that you're playing on, is predictable. And the way they're going to come at you, especially if they're going to cheat, is predictable. So you got to put that into your planning. Because sometimes strategically, your allies will betray you. And your enemy can be an ally. Or as it is said, it's an African proverb, but most people have identified it coming out of the Arab world, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Okay? Well, the only way the enemy of your enemy is your friend is you have to know the enemy's history as well as why their enemies are their enemies and understand what your relationship is to both of them.
Thinking moves ahead.
Right?
Sounds like.
Say again?
It sounds like
Right.
thinking moves ahead.
Right. What you know of as chess, what it trains you to do is think 5 moves ahead. They do this. If I move here, what are they going to do?
React.
If I move there, yeah, well, it's reactive, but you're thinking ahead so that no matter what they do, you're ready until they do something that you haven't seen before. Okay? But then it's chess and not life or death. Okay? So it's like what I say when I talk to people who are on paper. Okay, look, if you're on paper, don't smoke weed. That's basic. I know you're pissed, but don't smoke weed. Don't give them an excuse. Because it's predictable. They know what you're going to do. Okay? So deal with whatever it is that you're self-medicating with the weed for. I mean, if it's anger, then you've got to basically make yourself smarter so that they don't do the predictable moves. They call you nigger. Excuse me, that pronunciation is actually Niger or Negar, as in Schwarzenegger. That means black and from Africa. I understand that you must be using the English pronunciation. Nigger, you think you're better than me? I don't have to comment on that. Okay, so justice chess. It's a strategic simulation for the step-by-step creation of justice and peace. No justice, no peace. And enantiodromia, that which arises from its opposite. Now, what I tell people is you need to get a paper dictionary and get familiar with that. In fact, you can select your dictionary based on whether it has this word in it or not. Usually those are they're really big. Gutenberg, big biblical tomes, but this is an actual word in the dictionary. That which arises from its opposite. Now, if memory serves, when we talked about axiology, we talked about the African logic system, which is diunital, the union of opposites. Okay, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Love your enemies. Both examples of African logic. You can't love your enemy if you don't understand why your enemy is your enemy. And in what? Are you kidding me? Stop. Pop-ups in the middle of my lecture? Stop it. That which arises from its opposite. So, this is how it was labeled on the net. This graphic, Moorish nobleman playing chess from the chess book of Alfonso X the Wise, the date 1283 Castile. This is basically under Moorish occupation of Spain. The Moors conquered Spain twice. One for 150 years in 1050 BC. They held Spain for 150 years until the Romans kicked them out. Then they came back after Rome fell. 711 to 1492. Note the date. Not a coincidence. Yeah.
Is that where the word Moor came from?
Moor is there from the Greeks and the Romans who so that's Greek, that's Roman, they both mean black. Now, this is before racism as we understand it was invented. Racism as we understand it here in America is only 700 years old. Right? So slave, the word slave came from Slavs who were the slave class for Europe under the Romans and before. That's where the name came from. You know, Yugoslav, those were the slaves. Slaves in Africa were captives of war, and it wasn't permanent, and slaves could be literate. In fact, as I had, well, maybe I hadn't talked about it yet, but between 711 and 1492, Africans enslaved millions of Europeans. Can I talk about that? The Arabian horses? Must be getting old. Not as old as my daddy. You could still remember that stuff. Took him out to birthday dinner on Friday. He's 84, still a practicing shrink. Mm-hmm. All right, so Slavs were basically, Europeans enslaving Europeans for years. In Africa, there was slavery too, but they were captives of war. And they could be any race. Now, millions of Europeans between 711 and 1492 were enslaved. All right, so none of you ride horses, right? You ride horses? Western or English style? Arabic style. Thank you.
What's the difference?
There is a difference.
No, what is the difference?
The difference is basically, well, I'll tell you. One. Now, I know...
Like if someone says, how'd you ride your horse? That's the Western style.
Right. That's what they say in English, right? So Western style is actually an adaptation of Arabic style from Mexico. Okay? Because the Moors conquered Spain, right? And so they conquered Spain on horseback. And the horses that they had, the horse breed that we use, we call them Arabian. Okay? Now, you have to understand about riding Arabians. So the reason I brought up the whole equestrian thing is people don't understand, well, people who choose to ride what they refer to as Arabs, the Arabian horses, if you get a full blood, 100%, they are what you would call in a horse, spirited. What that means is that in the culture that they were raised in for war horses, they were raised as part of the family and they could understand a vocabulary, not that horses speak, but they could understand a vocabulary of up to 100 words. Okay, so they're intelligent, extremely intelligent. And if they sense your fear, they will throw you. And they are very willful. That's what you want in a war horse. You want a war horse that will not, because remember, Africans had a trading relationship with China before Europeans, therefore we had gunpowder and guns before Europeans. Right? So you're taking these war horses into battle, there's going to be an explosion. The horse cannot freak out. There's people screaming and, you want a horse that's steady. Okay? And that means that horse has to trust you. And, you can speak to them and all that. They're not going to talk back, but they will act correctly. Full-blood Arabian war horses. Right? Now, the concept, not everybody can ride one of these. Right? So what you do is you make a quarter horse. Okay? A quarter horse is 1/4 Arabian.
Does that mean he's slow?
No. That means you breed a little of the intelligence, that is the willfulness, out, but you keep the stamina. Right? So that anybody could ride it with some basic equestrian skills. Right? Now, if you're enslaving Europeans to raise your horses, as they were, in order to have them create quarter horses, you need to know what a quarter is. I mean, I'm not trying to be facetious, but understand people have to be numerate. You need literate and numerate slaves. They need to be able to read and write and speak, and they need to be able to do math. Right? This is no small feat. Right? It's basic. So, and slavery in Africa wasn't permanent because there was no permanent group of slaves. There were war captives. Eventually, you could earn your freedom. It's not about race. Anybody could have been enslaved, and we require literate slaves. Even the Greeks and Romans required literate slaves. Right? So you could earn your freedom. And if you're a European enslaved and you earn your freedom, you're going to go back home or you're going to stay where you've been for 30 years? What do you think? And you're going to interbreed with local black Africans and, produce all the mixtures that existed even before, but definitely will happen with interbreeding. Right? So, part of that piece then, this is the culture that is, if you notice this board, and if you play chess uses what we call algebraic notation. Which square are you landing on? A, C, whatever it is. Algebraic notation. Algebra. That's Arabic. Notice there's some interconnections here. All right? So when I'm talking about justice chess, because chess is a simulation of war between nations. Justice chess is, okay, you may be a pawn, but you can become a king. Or a queen, actually. The pawn is the only piece on the board that can transform itself once it's gone through all the obstacles. So they kept that rule. They changed others, but they kept that rule, and they changed the pieces, too. All right? So, Moorish noblemen playing chess, chess book of Alfonso the Wise. They're black people. That's not a mistake. That's who's playing it. That's where it came from, except they don't call it chess. They call it shatranj.
When did it change to chess?
With the Reconquest of Spain, 1492. And I'll get into that. Christian and a Muslim knight play a game in a battle tent, right? Because you can meet with your enemy in the field of battle, serve him tea. They still do that today.
They eat
Right.
together somewhere.
Yeah. Okay? You meet with your enemy on the field of battle, and, we ain't fighting in here. We ain't. Okay? I understand where you're coming from. You understand where we're coming from. We do that by exchange of tea, and, hey, maybe we'll play this game or whatever. Right? Because this is from the Crusades. Okay? Which is the Christian attempt to reconquer the quote-unquote Holy Land from those nasty brown people. Well, this is also a time when Christianity is whites only. During this time. Okay? Christianity is an African religion until it comes up into Europe. And they decide to recreate the Roman Empire using a reformed, a different form of Christianity as the glue. Right? So Christian playing chess against the Moor. So notice, again, Christian, Moor, right? They're talking about a racial divide even then. Okay, so even with the founding of this country, they referred to Christians as whites. Christianity was whites only as far as the West was concerned. After a certain point, after the Renaissance, when basically the dominant picture of Christ was Michelangelo's uncle. I'm not making that up. That's the Sistine Chapel. Who do you think was the model for Christ? Everybody else in Ethiopia and other places in Africa have a black Christ. Isa, Yeshua. It's only the Greeks that are calling him Jesus. I'm just saying. Oldest book in the world is the Peshitta, African Bible, a place that Christianity is in practice the longest in the world, continuously. Ethiopia. Geography, please, folks. Christianity is an African religion. Okay? Just the form that we got taught here is different, shall we say. Okay, so, bit of history. There is a website called the 65th Square. So, there was a game in Africa with basically the 64, 8x8, 64. It's called Al-Kurkat. So, it's Arabic, right? Like checkers, what we would call checkers, right? And there are, I'm getting ahead of myself, but ancient Europeans thought there were two kinds of black people. Those from Kush. Yeah, don't even go there with me yet. But that is why it's called that, where it's from. So Kush, by which they meant Ethiopia or all of Africa, and Indus Kush, what we call India today. Because if you remember from last term, those of you who were here, Egypt had conquered India. It was a colony of India. Yoga started in Egypt, got transferred over to India, where it got further developed later on. So, two kinds of black people. In fact, this convention is followed by the British Empire. If you watch the movie Gandhi, where the British general refers to Gandhi as a nigger. And as we will study later in this term, black people, American blacks are, how do we deal with racist America? Oh, well, let's bring over somebody that's dealt with, the Americans learned their racism from the British. Let's deal with somebody that successfully overcame racism with the British, and that would be Gandhi. Right? You can't bring Gandhi over to New York City because he's considered black. He can't stay in the Waldorf Astoria even if you have the money to put him up there.
He lived in
Yeah, and he lived in South Africa for a number of years too, as part of his history. But W.E.B. Du Bois and the early NAACP was trying to bring Gandhi over. Okay, how do we deal with this stuff, right? But he couldn't stay in any of the hotels in New York because he was considered black by Americans.
So he was in Britain?
Oh, the British are calling him nigger too. He lived there too.
When did he try to go to New York?
Early 1900s. Well, when we cover that in this time period, I'll break it down more. But he wasn't allowed to. So I'm just saying, this idea of two kinds of black people, those in Africa and those in India, it's an old one. Dates back definitely to the time of the Greeks and the Romans as well. Yeah.
Like, how you're saying they use black people for slaves, but why about any other thing, like animals and stuff, like black horses and stuff? Why they use those?
It's not so much about the color as just who's convenient. Okay? Who's convenient. We're using captives of war. How do we get them? There's already a trade of captives of war, and so, one of the pieces, all the chiefs that I met in Africa that said, oh, you're African American, forget about slavery. Well, no, we don't play that. So you want us to forget about slavery because you feel guilty because you sold us to white folks and didn't think about how they'd be treating us? because how they treating you. So no, we ain't forgetting that, but we are certainly willing to, go over there, you come here, whatever. But there's still this weird divide. Well, I won't even get into how African Americans treat Africans.
I'm still waiting for my 40 acres.
Yeah, me too. I'm still waiting. Obama got reelected. I'm still waiting for my reparations check too, because Romney said he's giving away stuff to some minorities. Where's my reparations check? Ain't happening. Don't wait for that. All right. All right. So, justice chess is the name for a practice of deliberate social change and a non-military revolt against injustice. So, to accomplish this, you have to engage in a program of self-affirmation, self-development, to plant the seeds of food for thought and cultivate them in an inner garden. Now, I don't mean to speak poetically, I'm just talking practically. You have to educate yourself because knowledge is not only a food, it's a form of wealth and wisdom. Once you have it inside you, it can't be taken away. You can give it away and it doesn't decrease its value. But make sure you don't toss your pearls before swine. And you got to understand what that means too. Because what is he talking about? I could go, you don't know?
Give it to the wrong person?
Okay, let me break it down. Pigs were once, this is not what he's talking about. I'm talking about from 21st century understanding, right? You ever been around hogs? Seen hogs raised? They basically eat anything. They will take your hand off. They will eat themselves. They don't mind being in the mud and the dirt and all that other kind of stuff. Where hogs came from is a critter called entelodonts. What an entelodont is an ambush predator about yay high, and they'll go after you. Like wild boars have tusks. An entelodont was, imagine something half the size of a horse coming after you. They can't run you down, so they're an ambush predator, right? That's what modern day hogs came from. Mostly they eat dead stuff, but they will, if they can run you down at short distance, they will do that, right? Even wild boars will do that, right? Okay, so a pig is descended from that. So it's only concerned with essentially eating and having sex and survival. That's it. Now, what Esau is talking about is a spiritual pearl, and how a pearl is formed, because he knows this. Pearl is formed when a grain of sand gets in the soft tissues of an oyster, and the oyster coats it with its mucus, and that's what makes a pearl. So a pearl comes from pain. How you deal with pain. Sometimes the only way we can learn is get knocked upside the head by life, and then I ain't gonna do that again, right? And it becomes a pearl of wisdom. Okay, so you do not cast your pearls of wisdom, that is the pain that you've earned, the wisdom that you've earned from pain, to somebody that don't care about your pain. That's a swine, because all they care about is eating and screwing and getting over on you. They can't see your pain. So that's what he's saying. Okay, pearls before swine. Okay, don't give wisdom to people who ain't ready for it. Or you might give them when they're ready, before they're ready for it, but that's where that's coming from. Okay, symbolic, the African way, epistemology, symbolic imagery and rhythm. It's not just the image, you got to understand the history behind it. All right? So, seeds of food for thought and cultivate them in an inner garden. So, assume, like my African ancestors assume, that anything an American school system teaches you is only part of the story they want you to know. Just assume that there's always more to the story. Assume what I'm telling you is only part of the story. I'm just saying. Okay? So, the hero is the teller of the tale. We've talked about that. It means one of three things. The teller tells the tale to make themselves look good. 2, every telling of the tale makes them look better and leaves others out. And 3, knowing this, you can compensate by finding other points of view. So the enemy is never a bad person in their own eyes. Or if they are, they justify it. Well, I got to do this because it's just the way it is.
Justify the means.
Yeah. Ends justify the means. So, Columbus discovered America. We did that whole thing 2 different ways, twice, as part of the recording last week and from first week. So, a narrative which leads to certain conclusions and leaves out, for example, the native voice, definitely. So, how do you create fertile ground for freedom when the game is rigged for oppression? How do you cultivate your own inner garden and a community garden to nurture freedom? And how do you market the fruits of that garden? And I don't mean necessarily sell, but you cannot give somebody wisdom unless they recognize that it's good for them. Can't. So you have to cultivate the need for that. So, these fruits and food for thought planted in your inner garden, once harvested, become soul food to nourish oneself and the world. So more basically, the struggle for justice and equality often must be achieved against what seem like hopeless odds. Okay? The pawn appears to be the least powerful player in chess. But it can take out any other piece. And once it gets to the other side, can become any other piece except for the king. The only piece that's capable of transforming itself. So, chess, simulation of war, just as chess, the practice of transformational peace. So, you first have to determine what is your playing field, what are the rules, who are the players, what kind of power do they have, and what do you want to accomplish? Okay? In order for a pawn to take out a queen, pawn has to know what the queen knows, what gives her power. And also has to have help, because a pawn just can't take out a queen by itself unless the queen can't move because of other pieces, right? Queens usually have protection. While I was in, should I mention this? Yeah, why not? Show of hands. How many of you believe James Earl Ray killed Martin Luther King?
He was instructed by higher ups.
Okay, so nobody believes that James Earl Ray killed Martin Luther King, or instructed, or not, right? So,
They didn't get that passport to Europe.
hello, word. Yeah, right. How do you get to London with no passport?
You didn't get out of jail by himself.
Yeah. So anyway, read a book which is basically the lawsuit that was filed by a friend of the King family, who basically King family filed a civil lawsuit. And you probably didn't hear about this in the news, right? OJ was all big news at the time this was happening, and this is about when this happened, right? After that, in the 90s, and they won. Because the only judgment that they were basically filing for is they just wanted $100, the $100 burial fee. And they interviewed 70 witnesses, et cetera, and the jury said, yeah, James Earl Wade not only didn't kill him, but this was a collaboration between the Memphis police, the FBI, the CIA, et cetera, et cetera. And they even got the guy, the guy who wrote the book actually even met the guy that was the actual shooter. Right. So, all right. So, I wrote this on my FB page, and I'll probably get in trouble for this somewhere, but, you know, it's on Facebook, so I was just thinking. The Romans considered Jesus a criminal, killed him, and then made his birthday a holiday. America did to Martin Luther King what the Romans did to Jesus. Is that like an unfair statement? Is that crazy? Your grade don't depend on it. I'm just saying. Okay? So, understand. All right? We've made, the most dangerous Negro in America, according to J. Edgar Hoover, we've made his birthday, or around his birthday, a holiday and a day of service for peace, etc., and lots of people don't necessarily get, the irony of that, but also, Rush Limbaugh, if, Representative Lewis had, if the civil rights marchers had guns at Selma, we would have had a different outcome. We would have even had to have Selma. So, what? Wow. You're saying that Martin Luther King, if they had shot on the Alabama state troopers, Rush Limbaugh is advocating killing police officers? And that would have gotten us free. Okay. Nice oxy he's smoking, huh? Yeah. All right, so the Moors in Spain, just to give you a little background. This is written by Poole's classic book, The Story of the Moors in Spain. So Poole was a British historian, white British historian, basically talking about, and this is published by Black Classic Press. The truth is that the conquest of the Iberian Peninsula, Spain and Portugal was an African, not an Arab conquest. The conquest of Spain and Portugal in the 8th century and later the greater part of Western Europe was orchestrated by the Arabs who conquered North Africa, but the actual conquest was carried out by African adherents of Islam. Goes on to say, the Moorish civilization enlightened Europe and brought it out of the Dark Ages to usher in the Renaissance period. They were capable of this because the Moors never had a Dark Ages to come out of. Medieval medical texts with anatomy and courses of treatment were written by Moors, using the technology that came out of Egypt. The roots of much of European culture can be traced back to the Moors, whose civilization was not only artistic, scientific, and commercial, but incredibly tolerant of other races, cultures, and religions. Many of the Moors' cultural and intellectual influences are still in evidence today, somewhat. So, for example, astronomy, algebra, architecture, guitars, libraries, aqueducts, gardens, basically none of which were present in Spain before the Moors conquered it. When the Imam in New York was basically talking about the Cordoba Institute. The reason he was calling it the Cordoba Institute because in Cordoba, in the 11th century, so 1000 AD, under the Moorish influence, Cordoba had the largest library on the planet. 1 million volumes. Okay, which means the largest library in Europe too, because that's still part of Europe. Okay, they allowed and encouraged not only mosques but synagogues and churches, all of which disappeared under the Spanish Inquisition. So they brought with them, among other things, chess, in addition to all that other stuff. We talked about that already. All right, so different names for strategic games. So, Chaturanga was a game played in Indus Kush, India, brought to Al-Kabulan, Africa, renamed and repopulated as Shatranj. So the original game in India, you can see these old pictures where you have Krishna, the god, playing Radha, Chaturanga, and there's just the back line, 8 pieces on a 64-piece board. So you've got elephant cavalry, right? Because elephants are used in war in Africa and in India. You've got horse cavalry. You've got foot soldiers. You've got a piece which I'll show you in a little bit called the boatman. So this was brought to Europe during the Moorish conquest of Spain and renamed and repopulated. I think, it's supposed to be black. I get it. Yeah, okay. So, brought to Europe during Moorish conquest of Spain, renamed and repopulated after European reconquest of Spain, and called chess. So, for example, so you had foot soldiers, those became the pawns, elephant cavalry, horse cavalry. In Shatranj, you had a minister who was also the vizier, the advisor to the king. There was a queen, but she didn't have the same power. With the reconquest of Spain, the vizier became a bishop of the church. The king had a cross on his head, the church. Right? The queen, after Queen Isabella, which had less power in Shatranj, suddenly becomes the most powerful piece after Queen Isabella. Right? And then you lose the elephants, and you got the horses, and you got the castles, and all the other kind of stuff. Right? So here's the idea with justice chess. Okay, you can have the same pieces, but you assign them different powers, and you can basically decide, okay, if I were going to play justice chess at Lane Community College, what would I need to do, and what piece would I be? So I'm faculty. We have a certain degree of power within the classroom, so we're knights. We can jump over the pawns or any other piece because of that, right? And we think that. Look, there is a class hierarchy at Lane, of course, like anywhere in America. Okay? Students might be pawns, but also classified folks might be pawns too, because of the power. Got to be able to talk about that, understand where that comes from. If you're basically talking about Apple Computer, my brother works for Apple Computer, there's a hierarchy. Duh. President of the United States. U.S. All of that. So, if you're going to be in a certain playing field, you have to, and you want to make certain change, you have to understand where the opposition is coming from and plan for it. So I had to use something that people were familiar with. So even if you're not a rated player in chess, you can get the concept, right? So, justice chess analysis. The Moors' free society was built on enslaving literate slaves. Many of their heirs culturally enslaved black Africans today, though Europeans suppressed the fact that they were enslaved in the Common Era by Africans. It did lead to a backlash where slavery depended on keeping African people illiterate. Okay, that's not the model they were enslaved in, but they realized, oh, if you're going to be free, you need to know to read and do math. Maybe we're not going to teach you to do that. Okay, but people understood they had to do that anyway. So, once the slaves were free, backlash was inevitable. It's written into the rules of the game. Okay, it is. Just take that into account. So, the bishop was once called a boatman. I went through all these different toy stores trying to find a little sailing ship, which is the original boatman. The best I could do was Jabba the Hutt's sail barge. from Star Wars. But I figured it was like worth the $10.
$10 for that?
There's a little Jabba the Hutt figure too, but I'm not into slugs, however intelligent they might be. Alright? Well, because I need a sailing ship that could fit on a chessboard. There weren't any, just Jabba the Hutt's sailing barge, right? So here's the point. If you know about sailing, sailing ships are pushed by the wind. Suppose where you want to go is where the wind's blowing. How do you get there? In sailing, it's called tacking, which you basically go diagonal and diagonal and diagonal. The bishop was a boatman. Okay? So the boatman disappeared by the time we got to chess. But the original piece was a boatman. So the idea is that it symbolizes what you have to do to reach your goal while encountering patterned resistance. Assume the resistance is going to be there. And you can still reach your goal, but you're going to have to go sideways against that resistance. Just like only healthy salmon go upstream. Dying salmon float down with the current. Each slave, I'm going to go there, each slave could become a boatman. Okay? The patterned resistance that you need to know to rise up out of the depths of a ship, and this was done 150 times that the historical record refers to. There were 150 rebellions of slaves at sea. In order to rebel, obviously they had to get out of chains and fight with the crew. Of course, they're going to try and keep that out of the record of slavery. Of course, they don't want you getting ideas. Okay? So they're operating out of literally resistance. I'm in chains. How do I get out? You saw it in Amistad, which, I'll give Spielberg that prop. Okay, that's probably how he did it. Yes. Okay, I'm digging at this digging through this nail on this piece of wood. My fingernails are bloody, but I got the nail out, and now I can slip the shackles. And then once I'm out, other people can get out. And once we're out, get a weapon without having a weapon. And so if he came from certain places where what we now call capoeira is from, you can take over a slave ship without weapons because you have a martial arts skill that is not obvious, but you can use it to take over a slave ship. And even if your feet are still shackled, you can do a move that can take out a swordsman. Now, again, as I said before, the mistake that the Amistad crew made was letting the slavers live. Because each of them had the knowledge to sail themselves back to Africa. So it doesn't matter that you're a boatman or a pawn. You have the power within you to free yourself. But it has to be internal, and you don't necessarily tell them all you know. Don't necessarily show how smart you are unless they think you're stupid. Don't let them think that. Alright, so in the British colonies, basically, and later the Americas were the first places where slaves were restricted to one or two races, Africans, and in some cases Irish and Scots too. So, Reconstruction. So, what is being reconstructed? So, the history books in the traditional canon, which lead you to think that the unity of the United States is being rebuilt. That is, the South is rebelling against the North, and Reconstruction is reconstructing the unity. But to us, what we feel is being built is that citizenship in a country, in a new country, one that we have fought, bled, died, and worked for while being considered 3/5 of a person constitutionally. And that ain't going to change until after the Civil War. Yeah.
It's off topic, but I have a appointment to 15.
You what?
Appointment.
Okay.
I just need to go for this.
Yeah. You paid for it.
I
It's your money. It's cool. Thanks. So, Supreme Court Justice Taney in the Dred Scott decision. Basically, Dred Scott, well, he said a black man has no rights that a white man need respect. And actually, there's more to the quote, but. So, in the my degrees are in psychology, but there are various branches of psychology, and one of them, I took a class for my doctorate called the Psychology of Law. And in the Psych of Law, there's a concept called original position. Now, the reason I'm going into this is if you're going to do justice chess moves, you have to know what the rules of the game are. And that means going to the Constitution as the law of the land, right? As well as the land that you're on, which we'll talk about shortly too. Okay, so original position, OP, deals with the mind of the writers of law. What are they thinking? So first, what is the problem the law is dealing with? Let me be controversial for a second.